All right, so you sent over some really fascinating research papers on tube amps, and
Hmm.
it seems like we're going to try to get a handle on
Right.
why these vintage pieces of tech are still so sought after in our digital world.
Right.
So let's dive in.
Quite.
We're focusing on an academic paper titled Fender's Tube Amplifiers by J. Christopher Westland.
Sounds good.
And it's really interesting
Yeah.
how even with all of our modern advancements, musicians are still captivated by that warm tube sound.
It really is fascinating.
It is.
Yeah.
It's like that old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
But there's got to be more to it than just nostalgia, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
we've come a long way since those early days of amplification.
There are some fundamental differences between how tubes and solid-state circuits work that contribute to the unique sonic qualities of tube amps. But to really understand that,
Okay.
we need to go back to the beginning.
Okay.
The story of tube amps is really the story of Leo Fender. And would you believe it? It all started with a bit of a happy accident.
Oh, this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by those accidental discoveries that change the course of history.
Right.
What was it about Leo Fender's approach that led to this iconic sound?
Well, Leo Fender wasn't initially setting out to create the overdriven, crunchy sound that tube amps are known for.
Right.
His focus was on building robust, reliable amplifiers for working musicians. Durability was key.
So it's all about practicality.
Exactly.
Okay.
His early designs were heavily influenced by RCA's vacuum tube handbooks,
Okay.
which were all about clean amplification. But as Westland points out in his paper,
Yeah.
it was this combination of Fender's robust design and the inherent characteristics of vacuum tubes that gave birth to what we now call the Fender sound.
So it's like he stumbled onto a gold mine without even realizing it.
You could say that.
Wow.
Early adopters like surf rock legend Dick Dale
Oh.
really pushed these amps to their limits, and in doing so,
Yeah.
discovered the magic of tube overdrive.
Right.
It was like a whole new world of sonic possibilities opened up.
And now that you mentioned Dick Dale,
Yeah.
talk about pushing an amp to its limits.
Oh, yeah.
I remember reading stories about him melting guitar picks
Wow.
with the sheer volume of his sound.
Yeah.
So-
Super fascinating.
We've got Leo Fender,
Mm-hmm.
his quest for durability,
Right.
and musicians like Dick Dale cranking these amps to 11.
Yeah.
But what is it about tubes themselves that make them sound so distinct?
It all boils down to how tubes handle distortion,
Okay.
or more technically, clipping. This happens when an amp is pushed beyond its capacity to cleanly amplify the signal.
Right.
It's as if you tried to fit too much water into a glass. It overflows.
Yeah.
And that overflow in the world of audio creates distortion.
Right.
But the key here is that tubes,
Yeah.
unlike transistors,
Uh-huh.
have a smooth, gradual clipping curve. This results in a warm, almost musical distortion that's pleasing to the ear.
So rather than an abrupt, harsh clipping,
Yeah.
you get this more rounded, organic kind of distortion.
That makes sense.
And this tube warmth, as it's often called, isn't just hype.
Okay.
There's scientific evidence to back it up.
Right.
Audio engineer Russell O. Ham
Yeah.
did some fascinating research comparing tube and solid-state amps.
That's right. I remember reading about his work. Did he focus on the way tubes clip compared to transistors?
He did.
Okay.
He also discovered that tubes have a unique way of handling transients, those sudden bursts of energy in music.
Yeah.
Think of the initial pluck of a bass string or the sharp attack of a drum hit.
Oh, good.
Tubes respond to these transients in a way that contributes to their perceived loudness and punch.
So it's not just about how much power a tube amp puts out, but how it delivers that power.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this ties into another interesting concept,
Right?
the logarithmic nature of human hearing.
Okay. To perceive a doubling in loudness, you actually need a 10-fold increase in power. A 100-watt amp isn't actually twice as loud as a 50-watt amp.
Right.
It's just a bit louder.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how does all of this relate to the sound of a tube amp?
Tube amps, with their smooth clipping and unique transient response, interact with the logarithmic nature of our hearing in a way that solid-state amps don't.
Okay.
They produce a sound that feels louder and more dynamic, even at lower wattages. Westland actually describes this phenomenon as a warm bloom.
Warm bloom.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Imagine a note sustaining at near peak volume as it decays, then smoothly transitioning back to a clean tone. It's like the note hangs in the air for a moment, almost glowing before it fades away.
Okay.
That's warm bloom in action.
That sounds pretty amazing. No wonder so many musicians talk about tube amps as having a soul or a personality.
And that brings us to the million-dollar question.
Okay.
Can we replicate this tube magic with modern technology? The quest to emulate tube tone with transistors and digital circuitry has been going on for decades.
Right. It seems like everyone's trying to capture that elusive tube sound in a more compact, efficient package.
Right.
From early fuzz pedals to modern modeling amps,
Yeah,
the pursuit continues.
indeed.
Yeah.
But even with incredible advancements in digital technology, many musicians still feel that nothing truly compares to the real deal.
Right.
There's a certain authenticity, a depth and complexity to the sound of a tube amp that even the most sophisticated simulations struggle to fully capture.
It's like trying to recreate the experience of seeing a live concert by watching a recording.
Right.
You might get the visual and audio information, but you miss out on the energy, the atmosphere, the tangible feel of the music. But before we get too deep into that,
Okay.
let's step back for a second and talk about the different types of tube amps out there.
Okay.
I know there's a whole world of variety when it comes to tubes and circuit designs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've been focusing on the Fender sound so far, but there are so many other flavors of tube tone out there, each with its own unique characteristics.
Yeah.
From the chiming clins of a Vox AC30 to the roaring crunch of a Marshall stack.
Wow.
The possibilities are practically endless.
Okay, let's unpack this a little further.
All right.
We've touched on the scientific side of things,
Uh-huh.
the history and the ongoing quest to recreate that magic.
Yeah.
But what about the practical applications?
Right.
How do these different tube types and amp designs translate into different musical styles and playing techniques?
Okay.
Let's explore that next.
Sounds good. You're right. We've mainly talked about Fender's influence, but the world of tube amps extends far beyond that. Let's consider different musical genres.
Okay.
Take blues, for example.
Okay, blues,
Yeah.
a genre known for its raw emotion and soulful expression.
Right?
How do tube amps fit into that?
Think about the sound of a classic blues guitar solo.
Yeah.
It's often characterized by a thick singing sustain and a smooth, creamy overdrive.
Right.
That's where tube amps really shine.
Yeah, I can picture B.B. King bending those notes on his Lucille, the sound pouring out of a cranked-up tube amp.
Yeah.
It's almost like the guitar and the amp are having a conversation.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of touch sensitivity comes into play. Tube amps respond dynamically to a player's nuances.
Okay.
A light touch might produce a clean, mellow tone,
Right.
while digging into the strings can evoke a gritty, overdriven wail.
So the amp becomes an extension of the instrument itself, allowing the musician to express those subtle variations in emotion and intensity.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And this responsiveness is something that's incredibly difficult to replicate with solid-state technology, even with modern digital modeling.
Which brings us back to the ongoing quest to capture that tube amp magic in a box, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned fuzz pedals earlier. It
Yeah.
seems like those were some of the earliest attempts to recreate tube overdrive.
Those early fuzz pedals were essentially circuits designed to push transistors into extreme distortion,
Yeah.
trying to mimic the sound of a cranked tube amp.
Right.
Think of the iconic fuzz tones used by Jimi Hendrix or Led Zeppelin.
Right. Those sounds were revolutionary at the time.
Yeah.
But from what I understand, they weren't exactly known for their subtlety or dynamic range.
That's true. They were more about achieving a specific effect rather than faithfully replicating the nuances of a tube amp.
So where does that leave us in terms of modern efforts to emulate tube tone? What are some of the key innovations that have emerged since those early fuzz pedals?
Well, think about how far technology has come since the days of Jimi Hendrix.
Right.
We've moved from simple analog circuits to incredibly sophisticated digital signal processing.
Right. We can now fit an entire recording studio into a laptop.
Exactly.
So how has that impacted the world of amplification?
It's led to the development of modeling amps, which use digital algorithms to emulate the characteristics of different tube amps,
Right.
seekers, microphones,
Yeah.
and even entire recording spaces.
Wow.
Some of these modeling amps are remarkably good at capturing the essence of classic tube tones.
I've played a few myself, and I've got to admit some of them are incredibly convincing.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, why do you think there's still this persistent belief that nothing can truly replace the real thing?
Yeah.
Is it purely nostalgia, or is there something more to it?
I think it's a combination of factors. There's
Yeah.
certainly an element of nostalgia involved,
Yeah.
especially for musicians who grew up playing through those classic tube amps.
I get that. There's something special about cranking up a vintage Fender amp and feeling that raw power coursing through those tubes.
Yeah.
It's a visceral experience.
Exactly. And that's where the scientific and the emotional converge.
Okay.
Remember those transients we talked about earlier?
Yes.
Tube amps excel at handling those sudden bursts of energy in a way that feels natural and organic.
So it's not just about achieving a particular sound, but about how that sound responds to the player's dynamics?
Precisely. And there's also the factor of harmonic complexity.
Okay.
Tube amps generate a rich spectrum of harmonics that contribute to their warm, full sound.
Yeah.
Even-order harmonics in particular are often associated with a pleasing musical quality.
Okay, this is where I need a bit of clarification.
Right.
Harmonics.
Yeah.
Even order. Can you break that down for me?
Sure. When you play a note on an instrument, you're not just hearing that fundamental frequency.
Okay.
You're also hearing a series of overtones or harmonics that are multiples of that fundamental frequency. Even-order harmonics are those that are even multiples of the fundamental.
Right.
Twice the frequency, 4 times the frequency, and so on.
I see. So it's like these harmonics are adding depth and richness to the sound.
Exactly. And tube amps are known for producing even-order harmonics in a way that's musically pleasing. They create a sense of warmth and fullness that's often lacking in solid-state or digital emulations.
That makes sense. It's like the difference between listening to a single voice choir and a full chorus.
Yeah.
There's a richness and complexity to the sound that you just can't replicate with a single voice.
That's a great analogy. This harmonic complexity is part of what gives tube amps their unique character.
It seems like there's a lot more to those glowing glass tubes than meets the eye. But let's come back to the listener's question.
Okay.
Why are these vintage pieces of technology still so relevant in the digital age?
Right.
We've talked about the science, the history, and the quest to emulate tube tone.
Yeah.
But what does it all boil down to? What's the essential appeal?
I think it comes down to this. Tube amps offer a combination of sonic qualities and dynamic responsiveness that continues to captivate musicians across genres.
Right.
They're not just amplifiers.
Yeah.
They're instruments in their own right.
They allow musicians to shape and mold their sound in a way that feels organic and expressive, almost like having a conversation with the music itself.
Exactly. And while there have been incredible strides in amp modeling technology, many musicians still feel that nothing truly replicates the visceral experience of playing through a tube amp. It's about the feel the touch sensitivity, the way the amp interacts with the instrument to create a unique and evolving sonic landscape.
So even in a world of digital perfection, there's still a place for the raw, imperfect beauty of those glowing glass tubes.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the magic.
Yeah.
It's the imperfections,
Absolutely.
the unpredictable nature of tubes that adds a certain warmth and character to the sound.
It's like the difference between a perfectly polished studio recording and a live performance captured on a vintage tape machine.
Right.
Both have their merits, but there's a certain raw energy and authenticity to the live recording that's hard to deny.
Yeah.
But, speaking of live performances, I think there's another aspect of tube amps that we haven't touched on yet.
Okay.
Their impact on the overall energy and dynamics of a live show.
Right.
Let's dive into that next.
Sounds good.
When you're in the audience at a show and you see a wall of tube amps behind the band, there's this anticipation.
Yeah.
This feeling that something special is about to happen.
Right.
It's almost like those glowing tubes are a visual representation of the raw energy that's about to be unleashed.
You're absolutely right. Tube amps have this undeniable visual presence on stage.
Gotcha.
They're not just functional pieces of equipment.
Right.
They're part of the show, contributing to the overall atmosphere and excitement.
It's like they have a personality, a stage presence of their own.
Yeah.
And that raw energy you mentioned, it's not just visual, is it?
No.
It translates into the sound as well, right?
Absolutely. Remember how we talked about the way tube amps handle transients?
Yeah.
That responsiveness,
Yeah.
that ability to translate those sudden bursts of energy into sonic impact,
Yeah.
plays a huge role in the live experience.
So when a drummer hits a crash cymbal or a bassist digs into a low note,
Yeah,
you feel it in your chest, not just hear it.
precisely.
Yeah.
And that physical sensation, that visceral connection to the music, is something that's often missing with solid state or digital rigs.
Yeah.
Tube amps just have a way of moving air that's different, more alive.
It's like they breathe with the music.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to the listener's core question. Why are tube amps still relevant today? We've covered a lot of ground,
Right.
from the science behind the sound to the emotional connection musicians have with these pieces of technology.
Uh-huh.
But if you had to sum it up,
Okay.
what's the core takeaway here?
I think the enduring appeal of tube amps boils down to this. They offer a unique blend of sonic character, dynamic responsiveness,
Yeah.
and tangible, almost physical energy that continues to captivate both musicians and audiences. In a world that's increasingly digital and sterile,
Yeah.
they represent a connection to a more raw, organic form of musical expression.
It's like they're a reminder that sometimes the most satisfying sounds come from the simplest of technologies.
Exactly, and that's a powerful lesson in a world that's obsessed with the latest and greatest gadgets. Sometimes the old ways are still the best ways.
So for those listening out there who might be curious about tube amps but haven't had the chance to experience one firsthand,
Uh-huh.
what advice would you give them? Where should they start their exploration?
My advice would be to seek out opportunities to hear tube amps in action.
Okay.
Go to live shows, visit local music stores,
Yeah.
or connect with musicians who use them.
Right.
Hearing is believing.
Yeah.
Once you've experienced that warm, dynamic sound firsthand,
Yeah.
you'll understand why tube amps continue to hold such a special place in the hearts of musicians.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to plug in and experience that magic for yourself.
Yeah.
But remember, the world of tube amps is vast and varied. There's a whole universe of sounds waiting to be discovered.
Exactly. From the classic Fender and Marshall tones we've discussed to the boutique offerings of smaller amp builders,
Right.
there's a tube amp out there for every taste and style. Don't be afraid to experiment and find what speaks to you.
That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exploring, experimenting, and finding the tools that best enable you to express your own unique musical voice.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe someday you'll be the one pushing the boundaries of amplification,
Yeah.
crafting the next generation of sonic marvels that will captivate musicians for decades to come.
Well said. So to wrap things up, it seems like tube amps aren't just a relic of the past. They're a living, breathing part of the musical landscape, offering a unique blend of art and science history and innovation, and a reminder that sometimes the simplest technologies can produce the most captivating sounds. Keep exploring, keep listening, and keep those tubes glowing.